Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for FlexPro's second quarter webinar. My name is Richard Ellis, and I'll be your host today. I'm the Manager of Marketing and Business Development for the FlexPro Group, and today we'll be covering effective time and meeting management. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a quick tour of the resources on the right side of your screen. Feel free to use the Q&A section to ask questions. To make general comments about our session, use the chat. Additionally, over the course of the webinar, a few polls will pop up, so feel free to answer. And finally, a recording of the webinar will be emailed to you at the conclusion of the session. Today's webinar is brought to you by the FlexPro Group, delivering project management expertise to the life sciences. www.theflexprogroup.com, or follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter for news updates. A little bit about who we are before we get started. The FlexPro Group is a project management consulting firm focused on the life sciences, well-versed in the areas of pharmaceutical, biotech, and med device sectors. We've been headquartered in the greater Philadelphia area, servicing Philadelphia, New Jersey, and the Northeast Corridor since 2008. We help companies move from development to commercialization, particularly in the areas of product development, commercialization, supply chain optimization, integration management, and early stage acceleration. Your speakers today will be Rose Cook, CEO of the FlexPro Group, Ken Sabata, Senior Project Manager in PMP, and myself. And finally, some key learnings to pay attention to today. We're going to focus on basic time and meeting management skills as a key foundation to improving productivity and enhancing team communication. We'll go over strategies to analyze and improve your time management skills, go over some meeting tactics to maximize your team management ability, and finally, we'll touch a little bit how we do things here at FlexPro. At this moment, I'd like to introduce Rose Cook, the CEO of the FlexPro Group, to kick things off.
Hi, everyone. So why is time and meeting management so important? Well, certainly as a business leader and as CEO of a project management firm, I'm understandably focused on results. And strengthening these foundational skills of time and meeting management can honestly be a game changer. And imagine what each person can accomplish if they do these things well. Imagine what a team can accomplish. So as you can see from Peter Drucker's quote stated here, until we can manage time, we can manage nothing else. So to begin today's lesson on how to do just that, I'd like to introduce Senior Project Manager and PMP, Project Management Certified Professional, Ken Sabata.
Thank you, Rose. Good afternoon. So continue on the theme of why is time management so important? Adopting good time management habits are going to help you and your team beat work overload, increase your effectiveness, and achieve more. Time management skills are essential for success, and using effective time management and practical techniques associated with same help people reach career success and teams their project goals. At the heart of time management is a very important shift in focus. Concentrating on results rather than being busy produces results. So here are some major time wasters. I'm not going to read through them all, but we've categorized them by external and internal. External are the ones typically that you don't have a lot of control over yourself, where internal ones really are things that you can help improve and control with your own habits. So think of the external ones as telephone interruptions, meetings you get invited to, visitors, possibly having not enough job, red tape within the organization. But internal ones, these are things that you can try and work on. Procrastination, failure to delegate, failure to set your priorities, failure to plan, not scheduling properly, and attempting to do too much at once. So where does my time go? Time management problems often stem from poor work habits. Therefore, you need to analyze how you spend your time. Keep a log for several days. List your activities and how much time you spend on them. After 3 or 4 days, look at these activities and ask yourself, what major activities or events caused me to use my time ineffectively? Which tasks can be performed really only by me? Which activities can be delegated, better controlled, or eliminated? After this exercise, you may be able to pinpoint your own time wasters, whether they are external or internal. So let's talk a little bit about the 80-20 rule. You probably are all familiar with the Pareto principle or 80-20 rule that says typically 80% of unfocused effort, usually spent on time wasters, generates only 20% of the results. The remaining 80% of results are achieved with only 20% of the effort. This ratio is not always 80-20, but typically it is the norm that a small portion of activity generates the largest proportion of returns. Applying time management techniques and skills ensures you achieve the greatest benefit possible, tackling high payoff tasks with the limited amount of time you have available. So what we're going to now do is talk about 5 effective time management focus areas in more detail. The first one being goal setting, the second, prioritization, the third, managing interruptions, the fourth, procrastination, and the fifth, scheduling. So focus area 1, goal setting. People neglect goal setting because it requires time and effort. But you got to remember, pay me now or pay me later. When you fail to consider is a little time and effort up front, saves an enormous amount of time and effort and frustration in the future. So you're going to want to set SMART goals. Do you always apply this rule? The simple fact is that for any goal to be achieved, it must be designed to be SMART. Goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So let's talk about that a little bit more. From a specific standpoint, make sure that you have defined it as tightly as possible with no ambiguous language. Who's involved? What do you want to accomplish? Where's the work going to be done? Why am I even doing this? And what are the constraints that face me? Make sure that the goal is measurable. What you mean by this is, can you track the progress and measure the outcome? You want things to be quantifiable. How much, how many, how will. Define it in very specific and things that in terms that can be measured. Attainable is how you're going to go about the goal. And is the goal reasonable? Is it worth doing? You want to make sure that while it may be a little bit of a stretch goal, you also want to make sure that it's not so poorly defined or poorly set that it's an underachieving goal. Relevant, make sure it's worthwhile. Is it going to support what the objective of the project is? Is it going to support the organization in a manner that achieves what the organization has set out to do? And then finally, time bound. Your objective should be include a time limit. You're going to get what done by when. Let's continue. The next focus area is prioritization. You probably have all heard the adage, time is money. Then think of this as a time investment portfolio approach. You want to maximize the return of your financial investments. You also want to maximize the return when you invest your time in doing something. So if we look at this activity priority matrix, we'll start up in the upper right-hand corner with the high impact, high effort. These are typically considered major projects. They obviously give good returns, but they take a long time to complete, which means a single major project can crowd out many quick wins. If you're going to engage in a major project, make sure you can complete it. As you move over to quick wins, moving to the left, these are high impact but low effort. These are the most attractive tasks or projects, giving you a good return for relatively little effort. Focus on these as much as possible. As we move down, fill-ins. These are low impact and low effort, and you don't want to be worrying about these tasks too much. If you have spare time, do them, but drop them if something more important comes along. And then there's the thankless tasks. These are both low impact but high effort, and you want to avoid these. Not only do they give low returns, they crowd out time, which would be better spent elsewhere. Without prioritization, you can work very hard, but you won't achieve the results desired. Focus area 3 is managing interruptions. So you're going to want to be able to distinguish what kind of interruption it is. Is it important? Is it urgent? Important activities have an outcome that lead to achievement of your or your team's goals. Urgent activities demand immediate attention, but they can also be associated with achievement of someone else's goals or a must-resolve situation. General Dwight D. Eisenhower had a principle, and it stated as this: what is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. So remember, not all interruptions need to be dealt with immediately. People get very little uninterrupted time to work on priority tasks. So interruptions such as phone calls, information requests, questions, and many other items crop up unexpectedly and often. You're going to want to learn to say no. Our last two focus areas are procrastination and scheduling. We open with a little bit of a teasing comment here where we say tomorrow is a mystical land where 99% of all human productivity, motivation, and achievement is stored. Basically, it's a way to talk about procrastination. I'll get to it later. But you have to be careful. After too many laters, the work piles up so high that many tasks seem unsurmountable. Now, you want to also know your goals and priorities and create a schedule that keeps you on track and protects you from stress. By the time you reach this step 5, you may find that you have little or no discretionary time available. If this is the case, then revisit the assumptions you used in the first 4 steps. Question whether things are absolutely necessary, whether they can be delegated, or whether they can be done in an abbreviated way. Remember that one of the most important ways people learn to achieve success is by maximizing the leverage they can achieve with their time. They increase the amount of work they can manage by delegating work to other people, spending money outsourcing key tasks, or using technology to automate as much of the work as possible. It frees them up to achieve their goals. So here are 10 tips to make you better at managing your work. Don't leave email sitting in your inbox, but by the same token, check your email on a schedule. Don't always be checking it. Admit multitasking is bad. Make every effort to do the most important thing first. Keep websites. If you're on the computer a lot and need to get to different websites, keep those addresses organized or bookmarked. Know when you work best. This has to do with your own personal biorhythms. Know when you are at your optimum working capabilities. Think about your keystrokes. In other words, let's be very careful about how much or how wordy we get when we're communicating. Make it easy to get started. Organize your to-do list every day. And this is a very important one. Dare to slow down and plan. We're now going to talk about meeting effectiveness and specifically in meeting ground rules. For the meeting organizer, start and end on time, restate and reinforce the meeting objectives, stick to the agenda and timing, parking lot tangential but important conversations, don't let them take over the meeting, record and publish minutes and action items with owners, due dates, and deadlines, and examine your meeting process to assure that you are continually improving your effectiveness. For the meeting attendee, show up on time, be prepared and participate. Be present, meaning avoid interruptions and side conversations. This one's very important in this modern day and age of video and teleconferencing. Be conscious of that etiquette. If people in the room are talking over each other, it's the person tying in by phone or video conference to really be participating and hearing what's going on. And last but not least, assist in driving consensus and alignment. In terms of meeting effectiveness best practices, for For the meeting organizer, don't call a meeting if it's not really necessary. And avoid meeting over lunch or standard breaks in the organization. People resent it and typically won't show up. Set objectives for the meeting in advance. Provide a time-bound agenda ahead of time that is designed to accomplish the meeting objectives and send it out in advance of the meeting. Invite the right people who really needs to be there to accomplish the objectives, and assign specific meeting preparation items as needed. As a meeting attendee, if you're invited, don't double book yourself and only accept if you're going to attend. If you can't attend a required meeting, provide the meeting organizer with your update or send a backup who is empowered to speak for you. I'm now going to pass this back to Rich and Rose for some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Ken. At the beginning of the webinar, I promised that we'd pull back the curtain a little bit and show you how we do things here at FlexPro. So just with this brief slide, I'd like to include you on how we're making a difference in the industry as well as how we run things internally. Number one, make sure the communication and meeting plan is set up from the start. How often will you meet? What are you looking to accomplish? And how will you get the job done? Number two, make sure you start on time and you end on time. Meetings that have a clear purpose as well as a well-defined timeline are proven to be more effective. Start the meeting by reinforcing your goals and objectives, and then recap the open action items. Was everything that was set forth to be done at the last meeting accomplished? If not, identify why. Make sure you spend the meeting tackling key issues, important things that need to be addressed while you're meeting together. Ensure that each one of those issues has a tangible plan to solve. Make sure that people are leaving with a purpose. Align tactics and those deliverables with your overall strategy, making sure that what you're looking to get done will help build your business and your purpose. And then finally, conclude and get the job done. Make sure that each member of the team is executing. And finally here, I'd like to bring Rose back on stage to close this up.
So as you've heard from Rich and Ken today, we've modeled the way we work at FlexPro, and we call it the FlexPro way. And we've modeled that on industry leaders, PM best practices, and honestly, years and years of experience. Here at FlexPro, we practice what we preach in the area of time and meeting management. In order for us to impact patient care, drive innovation, make a difference within life sciences, we must focus on making the most of our time, both working alone and especially as part of a team. And as you know, I like my quotes. So these quotes here from William Shakespeare speak volumes and truths about the need for this effective time, meeting, and project management if teams are to be successful. Better 3 hours too soon than 1 minute too late. And also, use of time. Let not advantage slip. So with those closing thoughts deep in your mind, please summon up some questions. At this time, we'd like to begin our Q&A. Back to Ken and Rich.
All right. I'd like to thank Lynn Fall, COO of the FlexPro Group, for helping us aggregate the questions today. Number one, Ken, in your experience, what has been your most difficult meeting disruptor?
It has actually been related to the keeping control of people in the room when you're holding a video or teleconference. People talking over each other is just brutal for the person online. And typically what will happen in a lot of cases is they'll just check out, and they may be very important to the conversation. So it's inherent on the meeting organizer to keep control of the discussion and make sure that the one voice at a time rule is applied when you're having discussion in the room.
Excellent. Another question here. What works best for a regular weekly meeting? A standing agenda or a unique agenda per meeting?
If it's I'll qualify that. If it's a routine project meeting with sort of a standing going to be following up on, a standing agenda is just fine. What I typically have is a fairly standard project team meeting format, but I will tweak it as necessary to make sure that the topics necessary for that particular week are covered. So if there's very specific things under a particular agenda category, I make sure those are broken out and advised in advance.
Got it. So speaking of those meetings, in your experience, maybe over your personal career, how long is a typical project meeting? Just on a weekly basis?
On a weekly basis, I think you really need to, a little bit depends on the type of project you're trying to manage. I typically feel that you should be limiting them to not to exceed an hour. Now, what you can have is different types of project meetings. If it's just a standing weekly project team meeting, I would certainly try to keep that to no more than an hour, if at all possible. What you can sometimes have is in the course of a project, an urgent matter that you're dealing with, which requires more frequent check-ins. And what I have done is had what I call 15-minute stand-up meetings at a set time, which says either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, or maybe both, depending on the urgency or the crisis you're trying to manage in your project. People come in and you don't even allow them to sit down. You have them stand so that nobody's getting comfortable or cozy. You're going to step through the issues that you need to talk about.
Got it. Great answer. Got time for a couple more here. Any tips for starting on time and ending on time specifically?
Yeah, a lot of times you have to work with the organization that you are, what I would call the organizational norms, right? And so you need to almost do a little bit of a self-study or whatever to say, okay, our meetings typically starting on the hour or on the half hour in this organization. And what I typically do is, if I know that most people, if it's a meeting heavy organization and they're coming from one meeting to another, I typically allow a window of anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes at the outset of the meeting where I know we are what I call gathering. Okay. I don't wait beyond that before I start the meeting though. And then clearly being sensitive, I try to practice what I preach. So being sensitive that people might need to go to another meeting where other project manager is waiting for your same group of people, because people tend to get put on multiple projects. I try to make sure I absolutely end on time so that they can go to the next thing.
Makes a lot of sense there. One more on the more modern approach to getting business done, the teleconference.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, what are some of the challenges that exist in team management issues with teleconferences versus good old-fashioned in-person, face-to-face meetings?
A couple of things. So sometimes when you, it depends on the culture in the organization. I hate to sound this way, but sometimes when you do a teleconference, people use it as a cop out not to show up even though they're in the building, right? So, I'll just dial in. And frankly, what you have to be careful of is that they're dialing in so that they aren't really present, even though they claim they're present. They're working on something on their computer instead of really being engaged. So I kind of have a general rule of thumb. If you're in the building, you need to be in the meeting. The teleconference or video conferences for the folks that literally are off-site or working remotely on that particular day. If not, it's just, it sometimes can be a real challenge to get people to engage properly.
Yeah, I suppose there are major pros and cons there.
Yep.
Just two more here. The first one, for larger project teams, maybe some of the more cross-functional departments or those who just have a lot of stakeholders. Is it wise to have one large meeting, or is it advisable to break meetings down to avoid too many attendees or too many stakeholders in one meeting?
I think it is critical to manage the size of the meeting. So it comes back to setting up that agenda in advance and making sure you have very clear meeting objectives set in advance. And to that end, then you can control the number of attendees. Otherwise, it can get out of control. At times, you can't avoid having a big attending meeting, but I have found that you usually have those when it's more of an inform. So is the purpose of the meeting to inform? So that may be to have a between core team and extended team as an update versus a meeting where you're trying to drive to decisions and the like. Those should be held to sort of a core team or the key stakeholders. And you need to set that out in advance in your agenda. And you also need to set that out. I typically set out what I call not only the purpose and the meeting objectives, but I also set out expected meeting outcomes so that people understand what I'm looking to accomplish coming out of the meeting.
Would it be fair to say, in your opinion, that most of the work is actually done before the meeting?
In terms of planning it, yes. You really, it just pays huge dividends to be well prepared and take the time to orchestrate and organize a good meeting. It helps you stay on track and on time. There's always going to be things that come up. I typically allow time at the end of any of my meetings for what I call AOB, any other business, and try to make sure that any tangential topics or whatever get pushed to that time slot or they get tabled for another meeting.
Got it. Well, we got time for one more here. This one is more about keeping people engaged in the moments, maybe a more situational question.
Mm-hmm.
How would you suggest handling a meeting where some PMs are on their laptops or preoccupied in person instead of being engaged?
Typically, I have a rule, and it is sometimes difficult to enforce, but I typically live by this rule, and that is the only reason a laptop should be in the meeting and open is if it's critical to presenting or having access to information that's critical for the discussions on the agenda. Otherwise, the laptop should be closed. And so that's not just for the PMs, that's for the cross-functional team that's in the room. So, it's with the advent of laptop computers, everybody lugs them around and brings them to the meeting. And inevitably what you'll see is they open the screen and I will challenge them from the outset to say, unless you need that open to be presenting for your particular segment of the meeting, then close it and engage in the meeting.
So similar to setting those expectations as if you were setting an agenda, being very clear about what you expect and handling it from there.
Yep. Yeah, the being present, and I put quotes around the being present means not just being in the room or on the phone. It means having your mind focused on what the meeting's about, right? And if you're off, working on something else, or you're checking email because you don't think this meeting's so important, I'd almost rather you not show up to my meeting, right? But typically, if I've done my advanced work, there's a reason you're in the room, right? And so if you're in the room, I expect you to be engaged and participating in the meeting.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ken, for answering those questions.
Yep. Happy to do it.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much again for attending. That concludes today's session. Remember that the FlexPro Group will be hosting a webinar quarterly. So we'll be accepting your feedback, publishing the polls earlier. You can access this webinar via email at the conclusion of the session. And remember to check us out at www.theflexprogroup.com. Thank you very much and enjoy the day.